we're continuing on with phase three. So phase three is when the Iranians are trying to attack into Iraq, but they have limited success, and it turns eventually into a stalemate. So instead of attacking to the south, the Iranians, they decided that they're going to move into Kurdistan up to the north. So these are the Kurds, it's the separate area, and they think that if they can get a foothold up here, they can convince enough Kurds to start attacking the Iraqis and to try to take, because a large population center is up here. And because of this, Saddam Hussein was really sensitive about anything going on with the Kurds. He knew that the Kurds had the potential that if they got a foothold, that he would have quite a bit of trouble. So because of this, he retaliates by starting to use mustard gas against the Iranians. So what this means is that he now shows that Kurdistan is off limits to him, and that he'll retaliate by using the gas. Kind of the end result was that the Iranians, they weren't able to attack Kurdistan, and it just shows that they didn't really have sufficient logistics. They didn't have the firepower. They didn't have the air support to really do anything during their attacks. Additionally, they didn't have strategic surprise. Part of this is that the Iraqis had a code breaker machine from Japan that they were able to take on, and the Iranians didn't really mix up their codes very well. So this meant that the Iraqis were actually able to know what was coming before it actually happened. And this is something that we'll talk more about when we look at the technological advances during the war. So they realized that Basra was difficult to take. So what they started to do is they wanted to attack the marshes that are north of Basra. So Basra being the main city at the very south, they wanted to attack kind of the swampy area close to the Shatt al-Arab River, specifically the Majnoon Islands, because there was significant oil reserves there, and that they knew that if they could capture this area, they would cut off the Iraqi oil supply in this area, as well as take that oil for themselves. So they use the amphibious operations. So they have, if you remember the pictures of the frogmen who are able to go by boat and by land, kind of like frogs. So they have this amphibious method, and they're actually very successful. This is kind of one of the few instances of success during this phase for the Iranians, where they are able to take on these Majnoon Islands. However, the Iraqis responded by using more chemical weapons. So what they do is they're going to use a nerve gas as well as mustard gas. So they use these turbo trainer airplanes that look very innocent, and I'll show you on the next slide. They use them it looks like they're just training airplanes or training pilots, and yet they drop these chemical weapons. Additionally, they start putting volt electrical discharges on the marshes. So if you think about this, they try to electrocute people who are, these frogmen who are using these marshes. So this creates thousands of, especially Pasdaran troops who are in this region. So they get electrocuted. Once they're electrocuted, they start to suffocate and they can drown in this area. And it becomes this horrible, horrible way to die. So this mixture of chemical weapons and being electrocuted on kind of your amphibious assaults. Additionally, once there's this panic enraged among the Pasdaran and the other Iranian troops, they start to retreat, and that's where the Iraqis are able to shoot those that are retreating, and it becomes just really a big mess in this area. So here's a picture of the airplane that was basically being used. It's a trainer airplane, and they're using this to drop chemical weapons. You see, it looks very innocent, but really it was very deadly. So Rafah Rafsanjani is the new Iranian head of military. So he's the Ayatollah who is in control of the military, and he insists on continuing the offensives, and that he thinks that the Iraqis are on the verge of defeat. If they could just really have this, complete assault, that they would be good. But the Supreme Defense Council within the Iranians, they realize that it's really not working. They're starting to use chemical weapons. They're shocking us and whatnot. So they don't back him, and they say, we're not going to have any more major offensives during this summer, and we're going to start the trench warfare. So this is kind of this verge as we're moving into 1984. This is where it's going to be a stalemate, and neither side's really going to be able to do anything, and it's just going to become this long, prolonged war where they're not really fighting, and they're just suffering. So Saddam, as kind of the way to show that he's not really at fault for starting this war, he refuses to make any offenses. So he kind of wants it to look like the Iranians are continuing this war for no reason, that they're just fundamentalists, they're just being stubborn. So he doesn't do any offensives either. So this is where the trench warfare is really going to start, and the stalemates that we'll talk about in the next phase. To wrap up the aerial assaults, like we said earlier, the Iranian failure was partially because they didn't have the air support, because of the lack of trust in the Air Force by the regime. They didn't have the weapons or the tools to be able to do their jobs. They have a limited number of airplanes at their disposal. And then, like the first two phases, the sea war is very insignificant. There's not really anything going on. The tanker wars are still very, very slow, but that'll start to pick up as we move forward. So we'll go ahead and stop there, and then we'll move on to the phase 4 in the next video.